I'm Chad, and welcome to another Motovlog. So it has been quite a week for me. I have started my new job and I am in the thick of training and onboarding. I have exams to take and study for, all kinds of tasks, and it has just been educational but exhausting, which makes me extra happy that I'm able to get out and record this video today for you to enjoy. And the topic of this video is going to be the story of my second motorcycle, my 2006 Triumph Daytona 675, which I affectionately named Emma. It's kind of funny. I used to be very into naming motorcycles and feeling like it would make that whole spiritual, emotional, and physical connection better when riding the bike. But over the years, I've just kind of stopped. Got nothing against it, but for whatever reason, this bike doesn't have a name. My WR doesn't have a name. The last bike I named was my 2012 Triumph Daytona 675R, which I still have, affectionately named Brandy, because she's a fine girl. Even at 6,000 RPM, never gets old. So, the year was 2015, and I had actually listed my 2003 Honda CBR 600RR, my first bike, named Sally, which I told a story about buying in this video up in the card over there. I had grown tired of the old girl. She was mega outdated compared to my friends' bikes, and I was just ready for something a little bit newer and more exciting. So I listed her for sale in, I think, May of that year, and just continued to repost, put her up there for more money than I thought I would be able to get, and really just enough money that I would be able to put myself into an R6 or a Daytona 675 if the right deal came along. And I was patient and didn't budge on my price at all, and it took until August, but I eventually sold my CBR 600RR conveniently for just as much money as this 2006 Daytona 675 was listed for. So in almost exactly 24 hours, I literally got the cash for the CBR, and the next day drove up to Whittier to pick up my Daytona. Now, she was a little rough around the edges, but overall she ran really well. Only thing that was kind of weird was she was geared way down. Front sprocket was actually down 2 teeth in the front. So first gear was about as usable as first gear on this bike, although it didn't go quite as fast. And if I was cruising on the freeway at the speed limit, I was at like 9,500 or 10,000 RPM when the bike revved to 14. So yeah, not super desirable. But anyways, I got what I felt like was a great deal on the bike. Just needed new tires, which I wanted to replace anyways, just to get tires that I was comfortable with on the bike, and just changing the chain and sprockets. What would this video be without a little virtual reality detour? But aside from wanting to obviously change back the chain and sprockets and do some basic maintenance, the bike overall seemed like it was pretty sorted. Previous owner did say he had dropped it in his driveway, so there was a tiny little scratch on the stator cover, but the fairings were still good, so we made a deal. 20,000 miles, clean title. Things were looking pretty good. So, ride her home. The next day, battery's dead. Get a new battery. Everything seems good. About a month later, go to finally change the chain and sprockets, and when I'm taking the front sprocket off, we got the cover off, it's just super dirty up by the engine case. So I start cleaning it with some contact cleaner, and eventually I get to this what looks like gum, and I'm just like, what is going on here? But like, actually too, what is going on here? Got some major construction, so it seems. I go to start kind of picking it off, and then come to find gashed metal underneath. And I'm just like, oh geez, this person had the chain break on them and crack a hole in the engine case, and they fixed it with JB Weld. And I was just kind of like, oh man, that is crazy. But it wasn't leaking, nothing really questionable going on about it. So I changed the chain and sprocket, slapped everything back together, and continued to ride. Never leaked oil, never really like even burned a lot of oil. But that was just something that was always a bit concerning. So I had that bike for, well, I had it in a functional state for 3.5 years, but I owned it for 4. She had a couple little issues here and there. I replaced the stator. I had the regulator rectifier replaced under warranty, or actually a recall because the bike was out of warranty. Had the forks rebuilt eventually, went through many sets of brake pads, many oil changes, did a valve clearance check and adjustment myself. Things were pretty good. Did a lot of track days on her. Actually crashed her twice at the racetrack. First time was a low side, rashed her up pretty good. Bought a bunch of used parts on eBay, got my fairings repainted by a friend of a friend. Came out great, bike was looking awesome. Then about a year after that, I high-sided her. Did some pretty decent damage to myself. Was off the bike for a few months, but fixed her up again and carried on. And then came 2019, which I should actually proceed with a story from 2017. So in 2017, it was like the beginning of the year, I went to go change my oil and got a big piece of metal that came out in the oil. And I was like, what the heck is this? Did this even come out of my engine? Did it just end up in the pan somehow? I was sharing a garage with my best buddy Sean at the time, so he was working on bikes too, and I just wasn't sure if that being a community oil pan was a piece of metal from something else he was messing with, but either way, it was not very comforting. At that time, I pulled the header, dropped the sump, got up in there with a borescope and a flashlight and tried to see if there was a chunk of metal missing from my transmission or the backs of one of my pistons or something, and didn't see anything. So, slapped it all back together because she was running fine before, except it made this weird buzzing sound. It's kind of like a rattle, like almost exactly at 5,000 RPM, but it would go away at 5,500. When I put it back together, that buzz was gone. So I think, I had always assumed that that was just some Triumph engine chatter, but guess not. I carried on and I rode her for another 2 years, and then eventually, again, while changing my oil, I found another piece of metal, and it was a perfect match for the one that had come out of the engine. It was machined the same way. It couldn't have been a coincidence. So at that point, I'm alarmed and decide it's probably in my best interest to try to do something about either rebuilding my engine or just getting a new one altogether. Bike had just about 36,000 miles on her at that point, so I was about due for another valve adjustment. So I just started looking at used engines on eBay, and I actually ended up buying one that, unbeknownst to me, had to come from a severely crashed bike, had a blown head gasket, and was with a seized crankshaft. So I made another video about that whole experience and trying to get my money back from a crooked eBay seller, which I'll put in the card up here. But eventually I decided, after that whole fiasco and getting my money back and everything, I decided I would split my engine, since it was already out of the bike, and see if I could rebuild it myself. And man, it was a pain to pull the engine cases apart with that JB Weld. Whew, that was a solid JB Weld job, I gotta say. But after disassembling the engine, I had determined by getting quotes for parts to rebuild it, new connecting rod bearings, piston rings, a ton of other components too. I was looking at spending like $3,500 just in parts, at least. I think I bought the bike for $4 grand. So, aside from the sentimental aspect, it hardly made sense. And that was the whole reason I was trying to save her, was the sentiment. But at the end of the day, it just didn't make sense when I could go and buy my Daytona 675R for just a little bit more money. I ended up selling her to a salvage cycle yard for parts. Got a few $100 out of her, but that was it. So she met her end, and I moved on and got my Daytona 675R. But anyways, that is Emma's story. Just in case you were ever curious about my second motorcycle, what became of her. It's a sad ending to a story, but at that point, I got a little detached from bikes. Ended up naming my 675R Brandy, I think because in that moment I was so infatuated and emotional because I hadn't ridden a motorcycle in months. I was just so relieved to finally be back on two wheels, being that that is a core part of my identity. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave me a gentle little click of the like button and subscribe for future motorcycling content. I'm gonna have this girl on the racetrack here in a little bit under 2 weeks. It's gonna be a great time. Thanks again so much for watching, and I will hope to catch you in the next one. Until then, later. Woohoo!